Let's summarize what we learned in Lesson 1, Chapter 1. This lesson introduced us to the concept of using HTML. We learned that HTML generates the structure, while CSS creates the look, and JavaScript controls the behavior of the pages. We learned that there's more to web content than just the page. Web content also includes image, audio, and video files. All this content lives on a web server, a remote machine often far from your own computer. On your computer or other devices, you use a web browser to request, retrieve, and eventually display web content on screen. You learned the criteria to consider when determining a web hosting provider. After you selected a web hosting provider, you need to transfer your files using FTP, which Chapter 1 shows you how to do. We talked a little bit about web server directory structures and how to manage all your files. We also learned the very important purpose of the index.html file in a given web server directory. We learned that we can distribute web content on removable media, and we learned how to structure files and directories to achieve the goal of viewing content using a remote web server. We learned the importance of testing on multiple browsers after you placed it on a web server. Writing valid standards, compliant HTML and CSS helps ensure that your site looks reasonably similar for all visitors, but you still shouldn't design without receiving input from potential users outside your development team. It's especially important to get input from others when you are on a design team. So I know you all are probably really eager to create your first website. And after going through Chapter 1, just learning a brief intro to HTML and the web, what I could show you is a screen share that will be coming up next of how to use a text editor, write a basic HTML file, and then open it in the browser so you can see an example of what your code looks like in the browser, similar to the example in Chapter 1. And then you can play around with adding more text and adding some new things. And that's coming up right now. A sample HTML file. So in your book, I copied the example from listing 1-1, our sample HTML file. It's also the same code I used in the PowerPoint presentation for the slides that says creating a sample HTML file. So I'm using something called TextMate. You can use Sublime, Notepad++, you can use TextEdit, any of those plain text code editors that we talked about in the book or the videos to use. So once you have this, whether you're on Windows or Mac, you hit save and make sure you save it as .html. Once I save this, I could then go into my files. I saved it on my desktop, Lesson 1, and called it sample.html. You can right click, or if you're on a Mac, control click, and go open with. So like I said, I use TextMate. You can use TextEdit. You can use Visual Studio Code. You can use Sublime, Notepad++. There's tons of editors you can use for your HTML. But what we want to do, after we already went and wrote our code, we want to see what it looks like. So running your code locally in the browser is done so like this. Open with, and you can open with Google Chrome. You can open it with Firefox. So let's see what it looks like with Google Chrome. So hello world, welcome to my web server. Okay, so let's go back to this. Now what if we change this to welcome to my web page, and then we added My name, Brad Florence. All right, and if you see, I'm copying the format above, copying this. I'm just playing around, and I changed this to H2 because this is just the size. We're going to talk more about that later. And then I'm going to save this file, save. Then we're going to go back into our file system. I have that saved on desktop lesson 1 here. Now it's updated. So I'm going to go open with Chrome, and it'll be updated. Hello, welcome to my webpage. My name is Brad Florence. Notice how this was an H1 tag in HTML, and it's bigger, and this was an H2 tag. It is smaller. We're going to talk about that in the upcoming chapters. I just wanted to show you guys how to actually get from this to this. And that simply involves using your text editor, saving it with a .html extension, sample.html, and then after that, going to where you saved it in your desktop, and then opening that by right-clicking it and opening it with your browser. So we can open it with Firefox and see what it looks like. And there we go.